All right, so today we're going to dive into some pretty intense stuff, I think. We're looking at excerpts from Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future
Oh, yeah.
by Hieromonk Seraphim Rose.
Okay.
And this is something that you sent in.
Hmm.
And just from kind of glancing at this, Rose does not hold back at all when it comes to ideas about deception, technology, and what he thinks the future of faith is going to look like.
Well, and what makes this even more interesting, I think, is the fact that Rose wasn't just like some random commentator on the sidelines.
Right.
He was actually a convert to Eastern Orthodox Christianity.
Yeah.
Became a monk and a writer. And his work has been pretty influential in some circles.
Really interesting. So, okay, let's just get right into it. You mentioned like this idea of a new era of religious deception.
Right.
What did he mean by that?
Well, Rose basically believed that we're entering a time when religious deception is becoming much more subtle and more pervasive than ever before. He argued that as kind of traditional religions are declining, that this is creating a vacuum for new movements to kind of pop up and take their place.
Oh, so these new movements, they almost sound like wolves in sheep's clothing then.
In a way, yeah.
They seem spiritual on the surface, but maybe underneath it's not quite what it seems.
Right.
And you also mentioned that Rose was concerned about the role of technology in all of this.
Yeah.
Which must have been pretty eyebrow-raising back in the 70s when he was writing.
I think so. I mean, he really saw a direct link between technological advancement and this rise of deception that he was talking about.
Okay.
He was very wary of technology's potential for mind control and manipulation.
Interesting.
He even suggested that technology could be used to create what he called artificial paradises.
Oh, wow.
These kind of like virtual spaces that offer a shallow substitute for real, genuine connection.
Yeah, I can see how that idea really resonates today.
Yeah.
We're constantly like plugged into our devices, bombarded with information and entertainment. It's almost like we're living in this constant state of distraction.
Right.
Do you think that's kind of what he was getting at with these artificial paradises?
Yeah, I mean, remember, he was writing at the very dawn of the digital age.
Yeah.
Right. He couldn't have predicted, obviously, the scale of the internet or social media today, but he seemed to really grasp this potential for technology to create these echo chambers, these carefully curated realities that can really distract us from deeper questions.
That makes a lot of sense. It's interesting because it's not like he was anti-technology.
No.
Right. He was wary of how it could be misused.
Yeah, I think he was calling for like discernment.
Okay.
A critical awareness of how technology is actually shaping our perceptions and our beliefs. And I think one thing he was particularly concerned about was technology's potential to foster kind of a sense of self-deification.
Self-deification? What do you mean by that?
Well, this idea that we can become like gods ourselves through technology or through other means.
Oh,
okay. Yeah.
That makes me think of like the whole transhumanism movement. This idea that we can merge with technology.
To transcend our human limitations.
Yeah. I think Rose might have seen that as kind of a manifestation of the very tendencies he was warning against.
Okay.
This desire to achieve a kind of technological salvation.
Wow.
Bypassing the traditional paths of spiritual growth and humility.
So we've got declining traditional religions, the rise of these new spiritual movements, and then technology that's kind of amplifying these trends. Did Rose give any like specific examples of movements that he considered to be deceptive?
He did. He delved into several, but based on the excerpts that you sent me, I think 3 stand out.
Okay.
One is the occult revival, Eastern religions, and then the New Age movement.
Okay, let's break those down a little bit more because they cover a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Starting with the occult revival, what was it about that Rose saw as being problematic?
Well, Rose saw this resurgence of interest in magic, witchcraft, esoteric practices as inherently dangerous. He believed that these practices were opening doors to demonic influence.
And that they could ultimately pull people away from what he considered the true source of spiritual power.
So for Rose, dabbling in the occult wasn't just harmless fun. It was a gateway to something potentially much darker.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
That was his stance.
That's a pretty strong stance. What about Eastern religions?
Did he just reject everything outright?
Yeah.
He was actually a little bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Rose acknowledged the beauty and the wisdom that are found in some Eastern traditions. He appreciated their contemplative practices and their insights into human nature.
Okay.
But his caution was that without Christ as the center, these paths could ultimately lead people away from what he believed to be salvation.
So he respected those traditions, but ultimately believed that they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle that Christianity provided it. Okay, that makes sense. Now on to the New Age movement.
Right.
I'm curious to hear kind of what Rose had to say about that, because it can be kind of a mixed bag even today.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The New Age movement really caught Rose's attention.
So he saw it as this kind of blend of Eastern mysticism, occult practices, and what he called pseudoscience.
Pseudoscience.
So these ideas that sounded scientific but didn't really have a solid basis in evidence.
Interesting.
And he was especially critical of the movement's emphasis on this self-deification thing again.
Right.
This idea that we can become like gods ourselves through certain techniques and practices.
Okay.
He saw this as a dangerous distortion of true spirituality, which he believed really involved humility and surrender to God's will.
And it's interesting you mentioned self-deification again, because we see that idea even today popping up in different forms, even outside of religious contexts.
Right.
Like the whole self-improvement industry often seems to be built on this idea that we can optimize ourselves, unlock our limitless potential, become the best versions of ourselves through willpower and the right techniques.
Absolutely. That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And I think Rose might have seen that as a secularized version of the same impulse
that he was critiquing in the New Age movement.
Interesting.
It's like this relentless focus on self-improvement can sometimes overshadow the importance of things like humility, grace, acknowledging our limitations.
So Rose paints a pretty stark picture of the spiritual landscape then.
He does.
With all these movements potentially leading people astray.
Yeah.
I'm already kind of getting a sense of why he saw this need for a religion of the future, something to kind of counter these trends.
Right. And that's precisely where his own faith comes into play, Eastern Orthodox Christianity.
Okay.
He saw that as offering a way to navigate this increasingly complex and potentially deceptive spiritual terrain.
That makes sense. But before we dive into Rose's proposed solution, then I want to just pause and ask you, as someone living in the 21st century, do you see echoes of his concerns in our world today?
Oh, absolutely. The decline of traditional religions, the rise of all these alternative spiritualities, the influence of technology.
Yeah.
These are all trends that he identified decades ago.
Wow.
And they're even more pronounced today.
It's almost like he was looking into a crystal ball.
It's remarkable how prescient his observations were.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder what he would make of our world today.
I know. Like, imagine Rose trying to navigate the world of online spirituality with all the influencers and gurus and, promising enlightenment through a 7-day online course.
He'd probably have a lot to say about that.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting because even though Rose was so critical of so many modern trends, it's not like he was advocating for just retreating from the world or rejecting technology altogether.
Yeah.
He saw a path forward, and that was through Eastern Orthodox Christianity.
So if Rose was so concerned about all these trends, what did he offer as the alternative? Yeah. Why did he believe that Orthodoxy was uniquely equipped to address these issues?
Well, for Rose, Eastern Orthodox Christianity was more than just like a set of beliefs.
Yeah.
It was a living tradition, a way of life rooted in centuries of spiritual practice and wisdom. He saw it as offering this really solid foundation of faith, something that could help people withstand the deceptions and the distractions of the modern world.
Okay, but what specifically about Orthodoxy did he think provided that foundation?
Well, he emphasized several key aspects.
Okay.
First, he pointed to the ancient roots of the Orthodox Church, its connection to the early Christians and the apostles.
Right.
He saw this unbroken lineage as a sign of its authenticity.
Okay.
And its ability to preserve what he believed was the true faith.
So it's like Orthodoxy provided this direct link to the source?
Yeah.
A way to tap into the wisdom and teachings of the early church.
Exactly.
Huh.
And he also highlighted the mystical tradition within Orthodoxy.
Okay.
This emphasis on experiencing God directly through prayer contemplation, the sacraments. Rose really believed that this mystical dimension offered a depth of spiritual experience that you couldn't find in more intellectualized or rationalistic approaches to faith.
So it's not just about believing certain doctrines. It's about cultivating this deep personal relationship with the divine.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And for Rose, this emphasis on personal transformation, on purifying the heart, aligning oneself with God's will, this was essential for developing discernment.
Discernment.
Yeah, he believed that true discernment The ability to distinguish truth from falsehood wasn't simply an intellectual skill. It was something that was cultivated through spiritual practice and the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
That makes sense. It's like developing a spiritual muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it becomes.
Exactly.
Rose was also writing during a time of intense social and political upheaval.
Right.
Did he see this search for truth as having implications beyond personal spirituality?
Oh, yeah.
Did he think it had societal ramifications as well?
Absolutely. Rose was convinced that the loss of true faith had dire consequences for society as a whole. He saw it as leading to things like moral decay, social fragmentation, and ultimately a loss of freedom, as people became more susceptible to manipulation and control.
Wow.
He even worried that technology in the wrong hands could be used to create totalitarian regimes that could monitor and control their citizens in unprecedented ways.
That's a chilling thought. And it's not entirely far-fetched when you consider the rise of surveillance technologies and the way algorithms are being used to shape our online experiences.
Right. It's unsettling how some of his predictions seem to be coming true.
Yeah.
You know, he seems to have really grasped this potential for technology to be used for both good and ill.
Right.
And he was urging people to be aware of those possibilities.
So if traditional religions were declining and these new, potentially deceptive spiritualities were gaining ground, what did Rose see as the role of Orthodoxy?
Yeah.
Did he believe it was like the only true path?
You know, Rose was deeply committed to his own faith.
Okay.
But I wouldn't say he presented Orthodoxy as the only valid path to truth.
Okay.
He acknowledged that truth could be found in other Christian denominations.
Right.
And even to some extent in non-Christian religions.
So it wasn't about converting everyone to Orthodoxy, but about offering a path for those who were seeking a deeper, more grounded spirituality.
Exactly. He saw Orthodoxy as this kind of beacon of hope, a reminder that truth hadn't vanished from the world.
Okay.
But it was also a call to action.
A call to action.
Yeah, he urged his readers to be discerning, to critically evaluate the spiritual offerings of the modern world, and to choose wisely.
It's like he was saying, don't just blindly accept what you're being told. Think for yourself.
Yeah.
Seek out a faith that can truly nourish your soul.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. And that's where his title, Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, comes into play.
Right.
Rose believed that while other forms of faith might falter or be distorted, Orthodoxy, with its deep roots and its rich mystical tradition, would endure and even thrive in the years to come.
So he was making a pretty bold prediction there.
Yeah.
It's interesting because in a way he was both a critic of modernity and an optimist.
Yeah.
He was concerned about the trends he saw, but he also believed in the power of faith to renew and transform the world.
Yeah, that tension between critique and hope is really fascinating.
It is.
It's like he was saying, yes, things are messy and there's a lot to be worried about, but there's also beauty and truth to be found if we're willing to seek it out.
And he believed that Orthodoxy offered a path to that beauty and truth.
He did.
You know, as we've been talking, I've been struck by how Rose's ideas resonate, even though he was writing decades ago.
Yeah.
It's like he tapped into something fundamental about the human condition, our longing for meaning, our search for truth, and our vulnerability to deception.
He certainly had a knack for identifying patterns and trends that have only become more pronounced in our time.
And that's what makes this deep dive so compelling.
Right.
We're not just exploring the ideas of one man.
No.
We're grappling with questions that are relevant to all of us.
Regardless of our religious beliefs or background.
There are questions that cut to the core of what it means to be human in a world that's constantly changing and evolving.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From Rose's background and core arguments to his specific critiques and his proposed solution in Orthodoxy. We've also started to connect his ideas to our present-day reality.
Yeah.
And it's clear that his work is still relevant.
Yeah.
Even prophetic in some ways.
I think you're right.
And there's one more layer to Rose's work I think that's worth exploring. You mentioned that he believed deception often wears this mask of truth.
Yeah.
That it can be alluring and appealing to our deepest desires.
Right.
But he ever suggests that we can sometimes be complicit in our own deception. That we can deceive ourselves even without any external manipulation.
That's a really insightful question, and I think Rose would say yes, absolutely.
Okay.
He seemed to suggest that sometimes our own yearning for something more, something beyond the mundane,
can lead us astray.
Okay.
We can convince ourselves of things that make us feel good, things that offer comfort or a sense of purpose,
Right.
even if those beliefs don't actually have a solid foundation.
So it's like we're projecting our own desires onto the world.
Yeah.
Creating our own versions of truth that might not actually align with reality.
Right.
It's almost as if we're seeking a spiritual bypass, a way to avoid confronting the difficult or uncomfortable aspects of life.
That's a great way to put it. Rose was very wary of spiritual shortcuts.
Okay.
Anything that promised quick fixes or instant enlightenment.
Yeah.
He believed that true spiritual growth required honesty, humility, and a willingness to grapple with the complexities of life.
Which is a lot harder than just clicking buy now on the latest online course.
Oh, yeah, much harder.
Promising to unlock your hidden potential.
Exactly. And I think Rose would argue that this tendency towards self-deception is even amplified in a culture that values individualism and instant gratification.
Right.
We're just bombarded with messages telling us that we can have it all, be it all, do it all.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in that.
Yeah.
And lose sight of those deeper, more enduring truths that require things like patience and humility.
Right.
And a willingness to surrender to something greater than ourselves.
It makes me think about how Rose saw that connection between self-deception and the rise of these artificial paradises.
Yep.
We can construct these elaborate virtual worlds where we can be whoever we want to be, achieve whatever we desire.
Right.
It's tempting to escape into those worlds and avoid confronting the messiness and complexity of real life.
That's a brilliant connection. And I think it highlights the importance of discernment, not just in terms of like evaluating external information and teachings, but also in terms of examining our own internal motivations.
Okay.
Why are we drawn to certain beliefs or practices?
Yeah, what's driving us?
Are they leading us towards truth? Or are they just providing a temporary escape from reality?
So it's about developing a kind of inner compass, a sense of what rings true for us on a deep soul level.
Exactly. And for Rose, that inner compass was calibrated through the teachings and practices of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. He believed that the Orthodox emphasis on humility, repentance, and this ongoing struggle for spiritual growth. That it provided a framework for navigating the complexities of life and discerning truth from falsehood.
So in a way, Orthodoxy offered a path for confronting those deeper questions than those existential anxieties that we might otherwise try to escape through self-deception or distractions?
I think that's a fair assessment. Rose believed that true faith wasn't about finding easy answers or escaping the challenges of life. It was about embracing the fullness of human experience with all its joys and sorrows and finding meaning and purpose within that journey.
It sounds like a pretty radical proposition, especially in a culture that often prioritizes comfort and convenience.
It is radical. And it challenges us to reevaluate our priorities, to move beyond just this pursuit of fleeting pleasures and superficial satisfactions, and to seek something deeper, more enduring, more meaningful.
That's a powerful message. And it brings us back to Rose's belief that Orthodoxy, with its emphasis on tradition, mysticism, spiritual transformation, could offer this path forward in an increasingly chaotic and deceptive world.
He saw it as a religion for the future, a faith that could withstand the winds of change and offer a beacon of hope in a world that's yearning for meaning and authenticity.
Well, whether or not you subscribe to Rose's particular theological views, it's hard to deny the power of his insights and the relevance of his questions, even decades after you wrote this book.
Absolutely. He forces us to confront the big questions, the questions that matter most in our search for meaning and purpose. And that's a valuable gift, regardless of our individual beliefs.
It is. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Orthodoxy and the religion of the future, I'd like to leave you with a final thought to ponder. Rose believed that truth could be found, but it required discernment, humility, and a willingness to confront our own tendencies towards self-deception.
Absolutely.
In a world that's overflowing with information, distractions, competing narratives, how do we cultivate those qualities? How do we become more discerning, more humble, more honest with ourselves in our search for meaning and truth?
That's the question.
That's something for all of us to consider.